Hans Sennhaus, a German-American economist, once said, "No other commodity enjoys as much universal acceptability and marketability as gold." Keep this in mind as we discuss today China's announcements of finding gold and how that's going to change the global financial equation moving forward. My name is David Walaloo.
And my name is Elizabeth Ann Stewart.
And you are watching Geopolitics in Conflict.
And today's show is sponsored by Noble Gold.
All right, what's going on, Elizabeth, with these announcements from China?
So the announcement from China is that they found basically a new part of a larger mine that is estimated to be worth about 28 billion US dollars in gold. So that's kind of a big find, but I also want us to dive deep into not only this gold mine find, but also how China and other countries have been stockpiling gold over the last 2 years. Because this is a bigger this fits very well into the bigger picture of what's happening as countries are starting to prioritize gold.
Well, indeed. As a matter of fact, just for our viewers to know where the location of this 200 tons of gold resources that China just announced, it's at the it announced it's at the Zelen gold mine in Lezhu. I hope I pronounced it correctly. In Shandong province in eastern part of China. Yeah, the discovery will undoubtedly have a major impact on where the financial or the global financial direction is headed, given what's going on the global stage. And it doesn't take a genius to figure out that as countries amassing massive gold, and we talked about this so many times, that we can tell something is coming about how countries going to move forward when it comes down to the financial aspects of it.
Absolutely. Well, so do you want to hear some interesting things actually about that? So,
Sure.
interestingly enough, so I'd like to point out some of the other countries that are stockpiling gold
Mhm.
right now. So, very recently, we found out that Poland is actually stockpiling gold. And as you know, if you know much about geography, especially what's happening with Ukraine right now, Poland is
Mhm.
right next to Ukraine. So, interestingly enough, Poland upped its gold reserves by $1 billion, by almost $1 billion. So the National Bank of Poland actually increased its reserves. So the National Bank of Poland is a central bank, right? So there's a lot of
Mhm.
central banks.
Mhm.
Added nearly 15 tons of gold to its reserves in April, which is about worth about $1 billion. So that's very, very interesting. And I want to point out in the fall of 2021, the Bank of Poland's president, Adam Głupinski, said the central bank planned to add 100 tons of gold to its reserve in 2020. So it didn't follow through with that specifically, but now we're looking at them adding 15 tons of gold to its reserve right now. So this is what he said, and I think that this is important because of what he said about gold specifically, and this puts into context what China is doing. So he said, gold will retain its value even when someone cuts off the power to the global financial system. Now, this is the head of a central bank saying this. Keep in mind,
Mhm.
destroying traditional assets based on electronic accounting records. Of course, we do not assume this will happen, but as the saying goes, forewarned is always insured. And the central bank is required to be prepared for even the most unfavorable circumstances. That is why we see a special place for gold in our foreign exchange management process. After all, gold is free from credit risk and cannot be devalued by any country's economic policy.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Did you know that Bank of America is saying that gold will go to $2,200 this year? An all-time high. Invest in a gold IRA with Noble Gold Investments today and take advantage of this rare opportunity to secure your retirement savings. With the experts at Noble Gold Investments, you can ride the wave of gold's historic rise to financial security. This month, they're offering a solid silver 5-ounce America the Beautiful coin with every qualifying precious metal IRA 401k rollover. You can't go wrong with Noble Gold Investments. Hurry and go to geopoliticsgold.com to secure your wealth. Bag a free 5-ounce America the Beautiful coin if you qualify. That's geopoliticsgold.com. geopoliticsgold.com. There is always a risk of investment, and there's no guarantee of any kind.
Wow. Well, this is what explains why. And we did a video on this few months ago when we said that some countries of BRICS, mainly Russia and China, are amassing massive amounts of gold. As a matter of fact, I was aware of this few years back when two planes flew from Caracas in Venezuela, from Venezuela rather, to Moscow. Those two planes were full of gold. And at that time, it was on the sensitive part. The news didn't make it out, but later on, it was disclosed. Interesting enough, it was just only about a year later after that, another plane from this time from Switzerland was heading out to Beijing. It was full of gold. That gold belonged to China. So right there, it gives you an idea as to, okay, why all of a sudden, main players, because those two countries, Russia and China, are main players on the global stage, no matter how you look at it. So the logical question for us to ask is, why are they stocking up on gold? And now you have other countries like, for example, India, like Turkey, like Iran, even Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has a lot of gold in the United States, by the way, which I saw with my own eyes. It was the amount I saw was worth about $120 billion. I was looking at it with my own eyes. This explains, this is why Saudis are playing it safe with the United States, because they are afraid that the United States might freeze those golds in the US. And the same thing we see now with between Venezuela and the UK. As you may know, I'm sure our viewers will know this, that the United Kingdom is freezing the gold in its central bank in London. That gold belongs to Venezuela. And there are those who are saying, well, if the United Kingdom wants to do the right thing, they should return the gold to its rightful owners, in this case, Venezuela, but also the gold that belongs to India.
Right.
And we all know the history of the monarchy as far as gold and diamonds and all that, but that's not the point. What we're talking about here, is now the shift into the global financial system, given how, for example, the sanctions that the United States and the collective West imposed on Russia precipitate now countries to reconsider other alternative to the dollar. And the gold is, it's been known historically over 5,000 years, the gold has always held its value. Yeah, it goes up and down. As a matter of fact, where I am currently, and believe it or not, I just yesterday went to the gold place and asked them how much gold cost. And he told me, we can't believe it's so high. It cost about 700 dirhams a gram. A gram is about 0.093 of an ounce. So you do the math and you see what the cost of that is. So the gold is going up. And this is why countries, in this case now China, with access to this gold mine, is going to only boost its currency moving forward. And I'll be interesting to see how other countries going to react to that.
Well, so it's very interesting that you're talking about that, because we're really looking at countries around the world, especially BRICS countries, buying up gold, right? So, it's actually very interesting that we don't hear as much about, the basically Western world trying to buy up gold. It really is the BRICS countries. And I want to bring up what there we did a show on India and Russia and the issues that they were having because India is paying Russia for its oil in rupees.
Yeah.
And Russia basically said there's not enough trade, there's not enough that we want from India to be able to justify having all of these rupees. We can't do anything with them. And
Yeah.
so, there we don't know quite yet how they resolved that situation, but
Hmm.
we're looking at the BRICS countries wanting to have their own currency as an
Hmm.
alternative to the US dollar as a reserve currency. So it's interesting that they specifically are buying up gold. Now, other countries are obviously buying gold too. I don't want to say that it's just the BRICS countries.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see that, as they're trying to make a play for a viable alternative to the US dollar, a very good way to have that. And they even said it that their intention is to have it that currency backed by gold or
Gold.
minerals or precious metals or land, but have it backed by something. Because if they just created another fiat currency, we know the history of fiat currencies.
Yeah.
All fiat currencies fail. We know that throughout history. And so that was the big concern with the US dollar when
Hmm.
it became a fiat currency, when it was taken off the gold standard and became a fiat currency, is because we know that it fails always. And so it's interesting that they're not looking at, creating another fiat currency and they're
Hmm.
stockpiling this gold. And now China has a new 200 tons of gold that they can pull
Gold.
from.
Well, yeah, you absolutely. You brought up a good point. Just to go back to piggyback on your point about India and Russia.
Mhm.
Now, the way I see it, that they, Russia and India, could resolve this issue of the trade regarding the rupees by having India either pay in gold, okay,
Right.
or making arrangements to pay the Russians in the Chinese yuan. Since they don't want to convert through the US dollar because it's going to cost them on both ends, you may as well just make the arrangement. So it's going to be up to them between India and Russia. I'm sure Russia could suggest this to India, and all India needs to do is pay either in gold or in yuan, the Chinese currency, and the issue is resolved. Uh,
Right.
it's not going to be resolved overnight, but it might be, it takes time for something like this. Now, back to the point of how this is now going to change the financial equation, especially when it comes down to China. Remember, China already have some bilateral deals with other countries, including Russia, because the trade, as far as the energy between Russia and India, is conducted in rupees and the yuan. Okay, you got Iran and China. The trade is done in yuan. You got now the Saudis using the yuan in their bilateral trade, not the universal trade, but bilateral trade with China. You got Iraq that dumped the US dollar and embraced Chinese yuan to do the currency with it, to do the trade exchange with it.
Mhm.
Then you get some ASEAN countries. So, all this, why am I highlighting all this? To highlight to you the importance of now, with this massive discovery of 200 tons of gold, it's only going to boost now the idea of China saying, hey, we'll be happy to consider you using the China, our currency, the yuan in this case. But I think China is going to stop short by saying, we don't want our currency to become the global reserve currency like the US dollar. And here is the reason why, is because it comes with a responsibility. I
Mhm.
don't think so at this moment. I don't believe China wants to take that on. That could change moving forward down the road, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. But as of today, I don't see China wanted to do that, uh, having its currency becoming
Mhm.
the global reserve currency. What China has right now is that it has some hard assets, gold in this case, where it can boost its bilateral trade with other countries. And like I said last time, the new geopolitical landscape or the new geopolitical order It's not going to be based on ideology, but rather on economic blocks. And when you have gold at this level, those economic blocks will be willing to enter into agreements and using their own currencies backed by some hard assets, either gold or minerals or rare earth or some hard assets of sort. This is where I see it going.
In to piggyback on what you're saying, David, and to even push that a little bit further.
Mhm,
So this comes from US Gold Investor. So quote, for the first time ever, BRICS countries' share of the global economy has surpassed that of the G7 nations: Canada,
wow.
France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, and the US on a purchasing parity basis. Right.
Yeah, because many have wondered. I've been wondering about this. For example, and this is just as an example, could ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nation, could the ASEAN economy overtake that of the EU? And some analysis that I read suggest the possibility of that, but not, of course,
Mhm.
not tomorrow, because
Right.
remember, the EU's economy is a $200 trillion economy.
Right.
It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but you can see the trends moving forward.
Right.
Now, when you have something like this, as far as gold, most of those ASEAN countries, and this is just an example, by the way, guys, we're not saying that's what it is. I'm just highlight the example for you to put things in context. Those ASEAN countries is going to be looking at, well, we can enter into a trade with whatever country that we're going to be dealing with because it's backing its currency by some hard assets.
Right.
The problem we have for us, our US dollar is backed by debt. Even
Yeah.
China, 2 days ago, just sold about $240 million worth of the US debt and convert it into gold. So you can just see where the trends are headed. And this is where I believe the sanctions that the West imposed on Russia precipitate this shift, especially when you look at the entire global south, because
Mhm.
global south is moving into that direction. Because remember, Africa is rich in natural resources but also has gold. South
Right.
Africa in this case is increasing its output of gold. India is increasing its output of gold, of course. Russia and China. Brazil also, it's increasing. That doesn't have a lot in comparison to other countries, but they can manage. So Iran is increasing its gold. Turkey is increasing its gold reserves. So you can just see the trends from different parts of the world. And when you think about those countries entering into economic agreements, the financial aspect will have to be settled before they move forward. That's the way I see it, or that's the way I read it, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is very interesting because, we are, especially here in the United States, we're
Hmm.
we're going back and forth on this debt ceiling issue, right? So currently the way we stand right now when this is being shot is we're at a standstill. And it's very interesting. It's very interesting to watch other countries as they sort of watch us get further and further and further into debt and need more debt to service the debt that we already have, and not really watching the US have a plan to get out of that debt or have a plan to sort of reduce the budget at this
Hmm.
point. Because one of the
Hmm.
biggest issues is that the budget keeps increasing. We had some interesting statistics on that in another video that we did. But so other countries are watching this happen. And the thing is, if you dive into some of Ray Dalio's very good work on this, it takes the reserve currency about 10 to 20 years to fail. And I've talked to people who say absolutely the US, the dollar will always be the reserve currency. And maybe that's true, I don't know, but it seems unlikely based on the fact that typically reserve currencies have a lifespan, and we are coming at the very end of that lifespan.
Hmm.
And it's interesting. I think, actually wonder this, David, that if we were better readers of history, if, the people in power, or if the everyday person was a better reader of history, if we would keep repeating the same cycles over and over again, maybe we would see the signs and decide we wanted to stop the
That's
cycle.
true.
But we're not. And the history that we're taught in schools is not monetary policy, which it arguably that should be included, because I think it's very important for people to understand how the financial system works, how money works, even at
Yeah.
the most fundamental level. But we are absolutely watching this happen. And if you'd like some interesting statistics, you already know this, David, but for you guys listening, if you'd like some interesting statistics on what's happening in terms of stockpiling gold and the central banks specifically, I want to go back to Glipinski for a second.
Hmm.
Remember, he was the bank president of the Polish of the Bank of Poland. He says gold is characterized by a relatively low correlation with the main asset classes, especially the US dollar denominating the NBP, National Bank of Poland, reserve portfolio, which means that including gold in the reserve reduces the financial risk in the process of investing them.
Mm.
So we're looking at this, and this was in 2021, which means that the trend towards de-dollarization has only sort of sped up since then.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
Poland,
that's why we're seeing more countries more and more are moving away from the US dollar. Did I mean I'll be honest about it. Did I ever expect to hear that ASEAN is dumping the US dollar and moving away from the Japanese yen, moving
Mhm.
away from the euro? I mean, I was surprised when I first read that report.
Yeah,
And I kind of like, I said to myself, no, 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 I better check this out because it doesn't fit the norm of what has always been expected. So, and when you start to see the trend moving into that direction, de-dollarization, more countries moving away, well, it has to be some sort of a commodity that will have to
right.
replace what might lie ahead. I'm not saying that tomorrow we're going to see a new currency replacing the US dollar. That is not what I
No,
was
yeah.
saying here, because it's going to take time. But at the same time, when you start to think, for example, just to tie it back to our topic here, when you start to think about China's gold consumption, okay, which has reached now about 291 tons of gold, which is this one is year on year basis. That's basically, it's a surge of 12% from a year to year. That's quite a double digit increase. It's not a small increase, but also it gives you an idea about what type of a financial policies we should expect from China moving forward. And when you think about the second largest economy in the world, you're going to have to think in terms about how this is going to impact the rest of the global order. When I say global order, I'm referring to the economic global order, that is, because the financial aspects of it is the key fundamental issue that's going to have to manage how this new economic global order is going to be managed. And when you see, in this case of China, selling more of US debt, replacing it or converting that to gold, it tells you at least where the trends are headed and what we might expect within the next few years moving forward. That's the way I read it.
So an interesting thing about China buying gold,
Hmm.
right? So we're
Hmm.
talking about, what China's doing with gold, because, now so obviously they're looking for it on their own territory, which is a
Yeah.
very important piece of information, right? So instead of just buying the gold that's already there, they're
Hmm.
looking for it in their own territory. And I'm very curious as to what they're going to do with it, right? And so, what they found is ore. And so you bring the ore down to the gold itself, right? So that's
Hmm.
what they found.
Hmm.
So, according to Shift Gold, China sort of stopped buying gold for a little while, which was very interesting.
Hmm.
But China officially started buying gold again in November and made another large purchase of 30 tons in December. Okay, so this was of last year. That raised China's total gold reserves to over 2,000 tons for the first time ever. The Chinese central bank accumulated
Mhm.
1,448 tons of gold between 2002 and 2009 and 2019, and then went silent. So it's interesting. So he continues to say many speculate that Chinese continue to add gold to its holdings off the
Mhm.
books
Mhm.
during the silent years. So we at this point, according to this, we don't actually know how much gold China has right now,
That's
which is
true.
very
That's true.
interesting.
That is true. That doesn't mean, yeah, China is doing that. Other countries doing the same. This is no
Mhm.
different than oil. And I'm going to give you
Right.
a real life example. And the country that I want to refer to is Saudi Arabia. Do we know the exact reserves for Saudi's oil reserves? No. As a matter of fact, the Central Intelligence Agency has been for years trying to figure that out, and we
Mhm.
couldn't. We just couldn't. Saudis never disclosed the accurate numbers of their oil reserves. China is doing this, and there is a reason to why the Saudis are doing that. China is doing the same. You don't
Mhm.
want to disclose or play all your cards on the table. The way you can understand this is by looking at what the West is doing, to tie it back to why China might not disclose the exact reserves of gold. Because here is what's going on in the West. Central banks are also accumulating gold. They are
Right.
buying more gold.
Right.
They're not going to buy it in a vacuum. It has to be some solid reason or
Mhm.
significant reason as to why they will do this.
Yeah.
Could this mean that they know something we don't, vis-a-vis how China's is amassing massive amount of gold? The
Yep.
possibility is there as far as moving forward, because China's looking at it from the possibility of, and this is again just my guess here, looking at it from that perspective of the economic blocks, because again,
Yep.
that is what's going to define the new geopolitical order, because it's going to be based on economic blocks. That's the way I
Right.
can read it. I could be wrong, of course, and if I am wrong, I'll say I was wrong. So there's nothing, no shame to say when one is wrong. But the way I've been reading it is in this way. Uh,
Mhm.
they can't just be amassing this gold for nothing. Russia cannot
Right.
be amassing gold for nothing. Iran, India, Turkey, Brazil, Argentina, South Africa. You got countries that doing this, but now you have Western central banks are also accumulating gold.
Mhm.
It has to be something out there that is in the works. We don't know yet. And when you put all this and add to it our massive debt, the debt ceiling crisis that we are dealing with right now, we only have a few more days left,
Yeah.
because by June 1st, we're talking about next week. By June
Mhm.
1st, if that issue is not resolved, we're going to default.
Right.
And that's not it's a serious problem. Most Americans, I don't know if they fathom the consequences of something like this, how it's going to trickle down to everybody in society. Of
Right.
course, not the billionaire, not the millionaires. Those they
Right.
live in a parallel universe anyway.
Well, it's interesting that you're talking about this, David, because this, all right, so let's talk about central banks for a second. Okay. So, how much gold did central banks stockpile in the first quarter of this year? Central bank gold reserves increased by 228 tons
Wow.
during the first quarter of this year, the first 3 months of this year alone. That's 38% higher than the previous first quarter. That's really interesting. So you're absolutely right. And that's not just Brics, right? That's not just the Brics countries.
No.
That's everybody. Everybody is starting to do this.
No, you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. And this is why, for example, in the case of India and Russia trade issues, India could resolve. It can be resolved. It can be resolved by either deciding to pay in gold, and
Yeah.
India does have gold. As a matter of fact, it's part of the culture.
Mhm.
In Indian people, they buy gold. That's just part of how the culture is,
Yeah.
because gold hold its value over time. If
Right.
it survived 5,000 years, what makes us think it won't recently?
Right.
That's just common sense. So you look at it in this way and you say to yourself, okay, is something in the works that we don't know
Yeah.
about yet as to how this is going to alter the direction of the global financial system? And my answer to that is yes, there is something out there. What is
Mhm.
it? I don't know. All I know is that something is out there that is going to fundamentally change the direction of the global financial system. And
Yeah.
gold seems to be, for me, at least the way looking from outside in, seems to be one of those safest assets, hard asset that is
Mhm.
that countries are like amassing to make sure that they can fall back on in case.
Yeah.
That's the way I read it.
Absolutely.
That's the way I see it.
Absolutely. And it's, we say this all the time, right? We're not in those rooms. We don't know exactly
No,
what's happening, right?
no.
We analyze to the best of our abilities, but we don't know what that is. What we can see is that before something big, right? Like you say this all the time, David, it never happens in a vacuum.
No.
Geopolitics never happens in a vacuum. And so when you see these things and you can see them coming for years before they show up. You could take a look at what was happening in the financial system 20 years ago, and a lot of people predicted what's happening right now. And so you can sort of take these little signs, these little things, the fact that countries and central banks are stockpiling gold.
Hmm.
Why? Why is
Yeah.
that happening? What do you asked this earlier? What do they know that we don't?
Yeah.
What do they see coming that we don't see coming?
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing you can think of is you see where, for example, as an example, where investors are investing recently.
Mhm.
Well, where are they investing? Mainly in gold. They're moving
Mhm.
into that direction. It's because that's where the trends are headed. So whoever get that opportunity sort of to get on it right. I told you where I am currently. I went
Mhm.
yesterday to the gold place. I asked the guy who owns a store that deals with gold, and I asked him, and he explained to me, he's like, yeah, it's going up so high that we were
Yeah.
shocked and surprised because that when people buy gold here, it has to that increase has to be reflected in the prices they are paying. He used to
Mhm.
say to me that with this particular coin or belt or whatever, it used to cost, let's say hypothetically, $5,000 back. Now it's doubled, and they don't
Yeah.
expect it to go down anytime soon.
Yeah.
Like we said, because gold can hold its value for a long, long time. It go up and
Right.
down. If it survived over 5,000 years, what makes us think that it won't survive for the next 5,000 years? So
Well, and
that's the way.
especially
That's
when what's happening is people are stockpiling it. What's happening is
yeah,
governments are stockpiling it, and
yeah,
central banks are stockpiling it, right? So
yeah.
if the entities through which economics are done are stockpiling gold, it's unlikely that it will just completely lose value. That because that's the economic hedge globally is
That is
it seems to be gold.
That is correct, and this is why I think there is something coming down the pipe. I wish I know
Mhm.
exactly what it is, but
Me
the world
too.
of the world of geopolitics. You can only put like for example in the case of how the current tensions and all that that's going on. A couple of years back when I was doing the research for my Russia book and so on. And I used to think in terms of here are the scenarios that could happen. And this happened to
Mhm.
be one of them, what we are witnessing today. It will be no different when it comes down to this goal, except that you will think in terms of something, it's coming down the pipe,
Mhm.
and certain countries are taking precautions right now
Right.
to ensure that when that time comes, there is something they fall back on. And gold tends to hold its value over time. That's the only way I can read it moving forward. So
Yeah.
anyway, any other any other feedback on this, Elizabeth?
Just to
That's
let
me
you guys.
calling right now. Can you
Yes.
hear?
Yes. Just to let everybody know that we have a newsletter. We do, if you don't have time to deep dive into what's going on in the world right now, we have a newsletter that we send you guys the top 5 most important news stories that either legacy media isn't really covering very much or isn't covering at all. So if you guys want, some kind of juicy what's going on in the world coverage, check it out. It's at geopoliticsandconflict.com, and just sign up for the newsletter. It's absolutely free. And David has a government course coming out that he is teaching live. And if you want to know more about the government course, then sign up for the newsletter, and I will be sending out more information when we have it. But David's going to be teaching that course live in July.
Indeed, I am very excited for that. I am very, very, very excited because of what I'm going to share, because this will be live, and usually I tend to get deeper into stuff like that, and it's something I am very, 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 very familiar with. I teach government, so so I can't wait to share this with our members who's going to be joining the course, because it's information that is not just for this year. This is information for life, to understand how the government operates, because it impacts you one way or another, whether we like it or not. So, and I want to
Absolutely.
just say one more thing before we sign off here, that if this is your first time watching our channel, make sure please to subscribe and hit that like button to help us out with the algorithm, as you may know. So,
It
well, we
really
hope
does
you.
help us out if you guys do that. It really does help us out, and it helps other people find out about our channel and find out about some of the things that legacy media doesn't really want you to be paying attention to.
Indeed, indeed. Well, we hope you find this very informative, and we look forward to seeing you next time. As always, prepare yourself for a changing world order. Till next time. Bye bye.